Well, hello everybody and welcome back to Elegant ASMR with me, Nicholas Fairford. So today I wanted to do something slightly different, something that I've never done before, and I kind of want to do an in-depth look at somebody who I have been fascinated with for quite some time, a very popular figure in the 20th century, kind of a legend and an icon, and that is Jackie Kennedy Onassis. So I'm going to do in this video a little bit of a deep dive into her life, her style, and the influence that she has had on so many people around the world. And I'm going to do it. I've got some notes here that I'm going to be referring to so that we don't miss anything out. And I've also got two books that I'm going to reference. This one is Jackie, The Life and Style of Jackie Kennedy Onassis. So I'm going to be going through some of the pictures in here when we talk about certain parts of her life. And then I've got something very, very special. This is one of my most prized possessions. This is the... is that focusing? This is the 1996 Sotheby's auction catalogue of Jackie's estate when after she died, her children put her things for auction, and this is the catalogue of everything that was sold. This was a monumental auction. I think they estimated that it would reach $4 million, and it ended up reaching $35 million in 1996. And this is a fantastic insight into Jackie's life. It shows you some very personal photographs inside her home and shows some of her intimate possessions. So it's a great resource to look over. So I thought that this would be quite fun and interesting and something a little bit different. So first of all, who was Jackie Kennedy Onassis? Now I think most people, when they think about Jackie, will think about that very famous pink Chanel suit, one of the most recognizable suits in modern history, especially the image of it splattered in the blood of her husband just moments after he was assassinated in 1963. And when that happened, people around her said to her, "Jackie, you need to get out of this pink suit and face the world." And she insisted on wearing the suit. She said, "Let them see what they've done." And so she wanted the world to see this blood-stained suit. And this is the fascinating thing about Jackie. She was somebody who was very self-aware and intelligent, and she was very astute, knowing that in terms of history and legacy, there were things that could be done, like the wearing of the suit, keeping it on instead of changing into something clean, to have an impact for many years to come. I'm 35 years old. Jackie died when I was 4 years old, yet here I am, all these years later. I know who she is. My parents never really told me about her. They don't really have an interest in this person, but her legacy has somehow reached me in my lifetime. When she was at her height of fame in the 60s and 70s, that was 30 years before I was born. Yet here I am, and she's a figure in my life who I can look up to and admire. And it is because of these iconic moments and decisions, wearing the blood-stained suit and other things that she did in her life, that have made her this icon of time that will live on. And I think even Gen Z, younger generations after them, will still know who Jackie Kennedy was. So yes, Jackie Kennedy was most famous for being the wife of JFK, the President of the United States. She was the youngest First Lady in history at the time. When they came to office, she was just 31 years old. So she was known for being a very glamorous and elegant First Lady. She was young, beautiful, incredibly chic and stylish. She was known for restoring the White House. She created a law that meant that the White House had to be historically preserved. We will talk more about that later on. She was then known for being the widow of JFK, how she handled the assassination with grace, decorum, and made sure that her children were well taken care of. She was known, as I mentioned, for her elegance, for her intelligence, for her culture, for her charm, for being this kind of queen for America, America's version of royalty. The era of Camelot is widely known, looked back on, regarded, and she was kind of at the helm of this creation. She was known for her global influence on fashion, for her strength during tragedy, for her lifelong devotion to the literature and the arts. After the assassination of her husband, she was then very well known for remarrying again. She got married to one of the richest men in the world, Aristotle Onassis, and she went from being Jacqueline Kennedy to being known as Jackie O. And in the 70s, this very stylish lady, someone who, when she was First Lady, elegant, sophisticated, traditional, and then in the 70s, this more icon of style, more modern, but still this elegant figure. This figure who was kind of ethereal. And then later on in her life, after the death of Onassis, she moved to New York, where she had a whole new life, and for the last 20 years, 30 years of her life, she became known as somebody in New York society. She took on a new role as a book editor. She had a very incredible career at this point in her life, and she lived this glamorous life in New York. She died very young at the age of 64 in 1994, and she was known to be somebody in New York who championed the arts, culture, charity work. She pioneered certain causes to improve things that would improve New York, the world, and create a lasting legacy. So I want to look today at her life, her style, her lasting impact, how she defined American elegance for generations, how she raised cultural appreciation for art, history and design, how she set a new standard for the role of First Lady, and why she still fascinates us today, all these years on, as I mentioned, fascinating people like me who were not born when she was at the helm of her fame, but she still lives on today as somebody who is eternally fascinating. So we're going to have a look into this life of an American legend of style and grace. So let's get on with this. I think it's going to be fun and interesting, and I hope you will enjoy it. So Jacqueline Lee Bouvier was born in 1929 in Southampton. Her parents were Janet and John Bouvier, and they were part of New York society, kind of the aristocracy of America, a very old world gentility where manners, grace, charm were considered the pinnacle of how you should behave. So Jackie was born into privilege. She was an American version of the aristocracy, and from an early age, she was encouraged to live this life and have these ways that were part of an aristocratic way of being: manners, grace, education, a love of the arts, culture. There's a photo of Jackie that I'm going to show you, and she is about 3 years old, and she's sitting on the back of a horse. And this is kind of, oh, she's not sitting on the back of a horse, she's leading her horse. And this is kind of, it shows you, it's a very cute photograph, you can really see that it's her, but it kind of shows you the very early days of this kind of privileged upbringing. She's wearing perfect equestrian garb, and she looks like a little princess, and that is how she was brought up. So Jackie had a sister called Lee, and Lee was quite a well-known person as well. She died a few years ago, and they are kind of like figures that you would, the closest that you can compare them to in today's world, I think, would be Kate Middleton and Pippa Middleton. High society sisters who were close and who had this very genteel upbringing. So yes, Jackie grew up in this world of privilege. She would spend her childhood riding, spending her summers in the Hamptons at her grandparents' beautiful estate. When she was young, she went to a school called Miss Porter's, and the education that you received there was more about manners, grace, etiquette than learning academia. And this was very typical for young ladies back then. Their role was to find a suitable husband. They weren't really encouraged to think about what they wanted to do for work. Their job was to be a wife. And so they were versed in etiquette, charm, grace, things like piano, horse riding, art, all these wonderful things that would make them become beautiful, elegant young women that would attract the most eligible husband. So Jackie's life as a young girl was to become this figure of grace. She grew up in a world where beauty, manners, presentation were considered the most important thing. As a little girl, she loved books. She would read for long stretches, escaping into stories and poetry. She loved horses, as I just mentioned. She became an accomplished rider, and this is something that she would continue to love for the rest of her life. She studied the arts and developed an eye for symmetry, colour, and gentle restraint. So most people think that elegance is something you acquire later on in life, and I do think it is something that you can do. I always talk about the fact that I was not born into a very upper class family, and elegance is something that fascinated me later on in my life. So I think that if you're not born into it, it's something that you can acquire if it's there in your heart. But for someone like Jackie and her sister Lee, elegance is something that was drilled and instilled from the moment she was born. It began in her childhood. It lived in her love for quiet beauty, her appreciation of good writing, in beautiful manners, in speaking softly. what people often said about Jackie throughout her life was that she spoke in this very gentle whisper. It was intentional. It was something that she was taught. Speak quietly. Be soft, quiet and gentle. You're a lady, and this is what you should focus on. So, Jackie's life, her early life, it was an education and formation of her mind to make sure that she would be elegant and graceful. So yes, as I mentioned, Jacqueline attended Miss Porter's School in Connecticut, and this was a place that nurtured her curiosity. They were taught manners, etiquette, art, and then she later studied French literature at Vassar. This was a school. And then she spent a junior year in Paris with her sister. And this was the formation and kind of a moment in Jackie's life where everything changed. I think for many of us, we reach the age of 18 and we realise that we're becoming young adults and that life is about to become exciting. And that was definitely the case for Jackie. She went to Paris, she studied for a year, and she discovered the pleasures of French culture, French food, French literature, French fashion, French architecture. She would walk around the streets of Paris and see the beauty of the buildings, the graceful lines, the symmetry, the honey-coloured stone that caught the Parisian light, the beautiful French chic ladies who would wear very simple but elegant clothing, the pearls, the furs, the handbags, the heels. She would walk around the museum seeing the beautiful fine art, the clothes in the paintings, and it gave her an understanding and appreciation of beauty that formed the rest of her life. When we look at the Sotheby's auction catalogue and we see photographs of Jackie's home, you can see that the appreciation of fine French furniture was something that she really, really loved. Here you can see this photograph of her dining room at home, French armchairs, French Empire-style curtains. She loved French things. She loved French clothes. And one of the things, here again, we can see French chairs, a French bench. When she was First Lady and she first discovered that she would have to wear American clothes, it was quite a frustration. She wanted to wear French couture. So she had to find a way to wear French-style clothing but keep it American. We're going to talk more about that a bit later on. So yeah, France was a place that really captured Jackie's imagination. She found it fascinating, and it was really where her sense of taste and style developed, and she really fell in love with the French culture. So she returned to the United States with a new sense of herself. She was more calm, thoughtful, and she realised the allure of being mysterious and holding a little bit of yourself back. She saw in the French culture that you didn't have to give everything away, and in fact restraint was something very beautiful and very attractive. If you could just hold a little bit of yourself back, not give everything away, it kind of made people want to know even more about you. And that was something that she continued to do for the rest of her life. One of her most famous quotes was to her press secretary, and she said, "I want to give the minimum information away with the maximum politeness." And that is something that she did throughout her life. So when she returned to the United States, she won a job as the inquiring photographer for the Washington Times Herald, where she honed her skills as an observer. So she would get sent out to photograph events, society, and then she would write articles about them. So this really gave her a love of photography, of creating beauty and writing about it. She was a very inquiring mind. One of the things that Jackie is most well known for is her thirst for knowledge. She always wanted to learn, and I think this is one of the foundations of that. So, in Washington, she met a very handsome young senator named John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and it was kind of love at first sight for Jackie. John was this very magnetic, charismatic young man, incredibly handsome, beautiful man who, again, was from a wealthy family. Now, his family was not as aristocratic as Jackie's, but they were a lot richer. So his father, Joseph Kennedy, was ambassador to the US, and he was a prolific businessman, so they were kind of billionaires of their time, which afforded them a fabulous lifestyle. And Joseph Kennedy was a very strict father. He wanted great success for his children, and he was kind of brutal in this sense. So JFK was this figure who it was instilled in him that he needed to be great, and I think Joseph Kennedy had these ambitions, these presidential ambitions for his son. So yes, because he was raised again in this manner to be a gentleman, to ferociously read books, to ferociously gain knowledge, he was somebody who was magnetic and charismatic, and Jackie fell in love with him instantly. So their courtship moved gently. They courted for a few years, enjoying each other's company. JFK, was a prolific womanizer, and I think he had a few years to enjoy that before marrying. So Jackie and JFK married in 1953 on a late summer day in Newport, surrounded by friends, family, and camera flashes. This was kind of one of the society weddings of the year. Two very prominent families coming together, and it was kind of the beginning of this very early Camelot dynasty. They didn't know it then. I think they probably had the ambitions of, but they didn't realise just then how huge this dynasty was going to be. So, because JFK was involved in politics, Jackie stepped into a political life. She was, like many, a political wife, and her role was to create a beautiful home, be a beautiful host, entertain political friends, society, create this life that would mean JFK could entertain and live this life supported by his beautiful, elegant wife. And she stepped into this role like a duck to water. It was kind of what she'd been preparing for, the training that she'd received again from these days as a young girl growing up in society. She was trained to be this person, so it came very naturally to her. But she was an intensely private person. She was known to be this private person all through her life. It was the thing she craved most. She wanted privacy, she wanted peace, she wanted this home life that was serene and beautiful. But she was prepared for public life, she was very good at her public role, and she just had kind of a natural instinct for this life, which was a match made in heaven. JFK had these political ambitions. She was able to support him in this way, to be this elegant, glamorous figure by his side who never shouted in her clothes, in her taste, in her style, even in her voice. In fact, until they became President and First Lady and Jackie did her famous tour of the White House, no one had even heard her voice. She was this quiet, elegant figure, this picture of elegance and strength, supporting her husband. So, becoming First Lady. When John Kennedy won the presidency in 1960, Jacqueline became First Lady at only 31 years old. And at the time, I think even now, she was the youngest First Lady in history. Now, what you have to remember, back then, until this point, without being rude or derogatory, the First Ladies before had been a little bit frumpish. A lot of the presidents had been old, so the First Ladies were older, they were a little bit dowdy. I mean, you had maybe Eisenhower before them, and she was very different to Jackie. She was this older lady, not really particularly interested in the way that she presented herself in terms of being this elegant figure. She was more interested in doing her charity works and things like that. So when Jackie became First Lady, you went from having this older, matronly type figure to this young, elegant, glamorous queen. And I think from the moment she became First Lady, this breath of fresh air, this, with both of them, with JFK and Jackie, this breathing in of fresh new life, it was a great thing for the American people. And they finally had these two figureheads, these kind of royal figureheads that could represent the country. So Jackie approached her role as First Lady not as a social ornament, but more as a custodian of history. She really wanted to find a role for herself and create something important and special. And when she arrived at the White House, she was quite shocked to see how unimpressive the house was. You know, you see this beautiful white Georgian building with its elegant wedding cake facade, but inside it was dowdy, old. There were hardly any furnishings in there. The furnishings that were there were new. They had no historical significance. There were no fine paintings. It was very bland, and Jackie was completely shocked, and she was kind of sad that this was the house that was supposed to be representing the American people. So she realized very, very quickly that this would have to be her legacy, that she would have to create a house that the American people could be proud of. So that is what she set out to do. Now, I'm going to talk about this quite briefly, but this was no easy task. What she managed to achieve in just a few years before they left the White House under tragic circumstances was nothing short of a miracle. So Jackie created the White House Historical Association. Now, you may not believe this, but until this was created, presidents and their families could live in the White House, and at the end of their term, They could just take anything they wanted. So what Jackie found when she came to live there was that, like I mentioned, there was nothing of historical significance. No valuables, no antiques, no fine paintings, no furniture. The house had no history and no story. So Jackie created the White House Historical Association, and she put together a team of people who would bring back some of these things to the White House. She managed to convince lots of people who had bought pieces that once belonged to the White House to donate them back. They completely refurbished all of the ground floor staterooms. So what you see now, the green room, the red room, the blue room, Jackie restored all of these rooms. She looked at historical pictures, documents, and she restored them to how they were supposed to be. And within each of them, she managed to find historical paintings, historical furniture that once belonged to the White House, that once belonged to previous presidents. And she managed to completely restore the White House to be a place of historical significance that the people could be proud of. And with this White House Historical Association, a new law was created that meant that after a president finished their term, they could no longer take anything from the White House that didn't belong to them, and they had to completely adhere to the style of the White House and make sure that nothing was altered or changed to destroy the historical significance. So for a 31-year-old lady who had 2 children and the responsibilities of being First Lady, this was quite a remarkable achievement, and I think we have to say thank you that she managed to pull off such an incredible feat. And yes, as I said, this is a very quick talk about how she did that, but this must have been monumental. So after she restored the White House, she did a tour presented on television, and it was watched by 65 million people. And as I said before, it was the first time that people got to hear Jackie's voice. And everybody was completely mesmerised and fascinated. This very elegant, beautiful young woman in a red tweed 2-piece suit with a strand of pearls, with this beautiful, gentle voice, this composed manner, speaking with charm, grace and elegance, with very quiet confidence. And people just thought, this is our queen. Jackie was somebody who everybody could be proud of. And then when the White House was this beautiful historical place of significance, she then transformed it into a place where the arts could be celebrated. She invited artists, dancers, musicians, people of great significance to attend the dinners and functions at the White House, and she turned the White House into this very magical place of beauty and grace. And this is how the era of Camelot came to be known, this era of a time which seemed to be perfect, that was a moment in time that was brief, that where the sun shined every day, that the rain only came in the evening, and everything was beautiful and perfect. Of course, this is a myth, and it was not all so perfect, but it was a beautiful, beautiful time, and a time where 2 young people, again, being at the helm of the country, being a proud figure for the American people, and really putting America on the map as this place of elegance, culture, and refinement. So Jackie became known for her incredible style, the clean lines, the soft colours, the pale pinks, the the two-piece tailoring, and the pearls, the pillar box hats, the big hair. And this was a look that, if you look back at fashion in the 60s, this was the look that most women adopted, this Jackie Kennedy look. Everybody was copying, and it was a very, very elegant, beautiful look. And I think Jackie became this figure that women could aspire to, of, more than the clothes, the way that you carry yourself, good posture, a thoughtful, slow way of speaking, a gentle smile that doesn't seem forced. Jackie understood the power of understatement. Her elegance was whispered. So these magical few years sadly came to a tragic end in 1963 when the president was assassinated. So he was assassinated in Texas. He was riding in his motorcade and he was shot from behind. There is an infamous video of Jackie being in the car next to him. She scrambles onto the back of the car, and this was just a shock reaction, and she said that she doesn't recall this happening, and she just remembers thinking that she was probably trying to grab pieces of his brain. And the following weeks, months after this is where Jackie had to be graceful, and she became known as being graceful in the midst of tragedy. She showed extraordinary strength. She guided the nation through shock and grief, and everybody was kind of in awe of the way that she did all of this whilst protecting her children and trying to curate and savour the legacy of her husband with dignity and care. So for a very young woman in her 30s who has this weight of responsibility on her shoulders, and then suddenly your whole life is taken away in an instant, and you have to do it on a world stage and be graceful. Can you imagine how difficult this must have been? But as we talked about, the pink suit that she was wearing when her husband was assassinated has become kind of the most iconic item of clothing that she wore, because she understood the power of a moment, that she could have got changed out of those bloody clothes, but then the message of what these people had done to her husband would not be as strong. Instead, she created this moment, this iconic moment, where she showed the world, this is a terrible thing that I've had to deal with, and she wanted people to know it in an elegant way, without shouting, without screaming, quiet grace. And then Jackie orchestrated this incredible funeral for her husband, this very stately procession to show the world who they were, to show that this was an important moment in history, and to give respect to her husband, who she greatly adored. So this was a really tragic time. I've read many books about Jackie's life, and we can quickly skim through this, but really this must have been a terrible time. I think for 2-3 years she was in a great depression, scared for her life. I mean, you think you're in this bubble of the White House where you have your husband, who is this powerful man, he is wealthy, you have the comforts of that, and then suddenly it's taken away. You have to move out of this home that you've created. You're on your own, and you don't know how you're going to survive and how you're going to earn a living. It's quite a terrifying thing. And then, of course, you have the assassination of her brother-in-law. And Jackie starts to realise that she needs to protect her children. She becomes terrified that Kennedys are being killed, and she really starts to fear for her safety as a single woman, for her own safety and the safety of her children. One of the things that Jackie is most known and respected for is the way that she was an excellent mother, an excellent parent. She once said that if you do one thing in life, you need to raise your children well. You can't bungle it. You have to do it well. If you bungle raising your children, you failed. So she was kind of desperate to provide protection for her children. And so when Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis came onto the scene, one of the richest men in the world, a billionaire, he showered Jackie with gifts, expensive diamonds, jewels. This was her time to really think about the next phase of her life and how she could provide protection and safety for her children. And so I think she took this with both hands. She realised it was more than a marriage, more about not so much about compatibility necessarily, but doing the right thing at the right time. I think this was, at its core, an act of protection. She needed privacy, she needed safety. Aristotle Onassis was very, very wealthy. As I said, one of the richest men in the world. Jackie knew that by marrying him, she would never have to worry about how she was going to look after her children again. She knew that she would be completely cared for the rest of her life. Not only that, Onassis had this island in Greece called Scorpios that was 1,000,000 miles away from New York, from Washington, from prying eyes. It was a place that she'd visited before. She could escape into this world of privilege and wealth, and she could get this privacy, this protection that she so craved. So these years from Onassis gave her distance from public life. She was able to be with her children, away from prying eyes, and she was able to have this privacy that she really craved. She enjoyed the Mediterranean sun, the quiet days, and she got to enjoy a life that belonged to her. She'd spent all these years as First Lady, being in the public eye, performing, being America's Queen, being the widow, the face of grief, soothing the nation, being a mother, being this figure of strength, and I think that must have weighed heavily on her shoulders. So when she married Onassis and she could escape to this world of privilege and privacy, it was a time for her to recharge and to just breathe a little bit in the comfort and safety of this new life. So yes, this was a real world of privilege. She could have anything she wanted. Jackie loved beautiful things. I'm not going to pretend that she was modest and simple. She loved French couture. She loved beautiful perfumes, fragrances. She loved jewellery. She loved beautiful interiors. She loved creating gardens. She loved luxury. She loved wealth. And this provided her the life that she had always wanted and always had, but on the next scale. There are stories that, she would fly a private plane to collect supplies of Chanel No. 5 and bring it back to Scorpios. So it was a life of privilege. And at this time of her life in the 70s, she became more of a modern tastemaker. She went from these Chanel suits to very slimline fitted clothes, beautiful flares, elegant Valentino clothes, more bohemian but still very chic. The hair grew longer, the big sunglasses, this very Jackie O legendary figure that we see now. And I think that is my favourite moment, the Jackie O look. So the marriage to Onassis was not easy. He was a difficult man, very powerful, and I think for him Jackie was a trophy. He was one of the richest men in the world. He had everything, and to complete this kind of status, he needed a trophy, and Jackie Onassis was the most famous. Jackie Kennedy was the most famous woman in the world. So by having her on his arm, he completed this image that he'd always wanted to have. He was a womanizer. He was famously in a relationship with Maria Callas, who was devastated to learn that he was marrying Jackie. And after they married, he did continue this affair with Maria Callas. So Jackie was very lucky. And Onassis was going to divorce her, but he actually died before they divorced. And the reason why I say she was lucky was because he died before he changed his will, which meant that she got a huge chunk of his fortune. I think she got $65 million in inheritance, and she got a stipend of like $1 million per year in 1975. So this was immense wealth, hundreds of millions in today's money. And so it meant that Jackie had secured for the rest of her life this life of security, comfort. She would never need to worry again. If she didn't want to, she would never have to worry about finding a wealthy husband again. She had done her duty to herself and to her children of creating a life where she wouldn't have to worry about these things again. Who can blame her for that, you know? So after 1975, after Onassis died, Jackie returned to New York and she began the third chapter of her life. One that many people don't really know that much about. It was kind of the last 20, 30 years of her life. And even though she was this very famous figure, she kind of managed to live life on her terms. So what most people don't know about Jackie is that when she returned to New York, she'd had this immense wealth. She hadn't done a lot in terms of work, and she wanted a new purpose and a new challenge. Her children were growing up, making lives for themselves, and she wanted to have a new purpose. Her great love, as I talked about at the beginning of this video, was reading. She loved to read. She was obsessed with books. She also loved writing, and she was very talented at both. And so Jackie managed to get a job as an editor in a publishing house. Now you may think we talk today about nepo babies, young people who get positions, very good positions because of their parents. Now it's no doubt that Jackie had connections and she probably was able to secure this job because of who she was. But what we can say, and what we can't take away from Jackie, is that when she got this position, she started from the bottom. Her office was a little cupboard without a window. She was on a very low salary. She didn't need the money, so that doesn't matter, but she worked 4 days a week. She learnt from the bottom. She didn't get any special preferential treatment, and she was willing to put in the hard work and do what needed to be done to learn the ropes and become an excellent editor. And that is exactly what she did. She worked there for the rest of her life. She published some incredible books and she became esteemed in this industry. She wasn't just doing this for the title or as a vanity project. This was her real passion. She loved her job. And you can see photographs of her walking to work in the morning in her beautiful corporate clothing. And she really did devote the rest of her life to this. So yeah, Jackie arrived each morning quietly without fanfare. She didn't want any professional advantages. She read manuscripts with care, and she guided authors with a respectful and thoughtful hand. She published works on art, history, and literature, and she championed voices that she believed deserved to be heard. Her colleagues described her as calm, meticulous, and deeply committed. So this life in New York really provided Jackie with a real sense of purpose, and I think she said that it was one of the happiest moments of her life. It was a time where she was becoming older, in her 50s and 60s, and she was finally settling into this moment of peace, of where she'd gone through so much hardship and tragedy, but now she was living life on her own terms as an independent woman, very wealthy, being able to do exactly what she wanted. And she met the third significant man in her life, a man called Morris Templesman, and he was a very successful diamond merchant. And even though Jackie didn't need a wealthy husband, what he was able to do for her was to take this fortune, this $65 million fortune, and guide her how to invest it and to use it so that it would grow and so that she could increase its value, and that is what he did. Now, he was a very intensely private person. Not many people know very much about him. He was quite a simple man, not handsome or dashing. Very simple, but he was a real rock, a real pillar of strength to Jackie, someone she could rely on. She knew that he wasn't going to be in the press talking about their life. She knew that he would be this solid rock. And she found a real companion in this man, someone trustworthy, elegant, who she could really rely on in this still independent way. So this was a very peaceful time for Jackie in her life. She was able to enjoy her children, Caroline and John Jr., living a peaceful life in her Manhattan apartment, taking walks in Central Park, having dinners with close friends, enjoying quiet evenings at home with a book. So she really reclaimed her privacy and her sense of identity. And I think this period showed her greatest power because it was her ability to reinvent herself while remaining true to her inner core of who she was. This woman who loved reading, literature, beautiful things, and living this private, quiet life. So, her final years and enduring influence. Sadly, Jackie Kennedy Onassis passed away in 1964. She had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She was, I think, 64 years old, and it's quite a tragic thing. It always makes me very sad because she was reaching this peace and this contentment in her life, finally getting to this point where everything was settling down, and then she becomes ill and her life, her health quickly deteriorates. There are some very poignant photos of the last few weeks of her life where she walks through New York and she's got this very elegant composure. She's wearing a headscarf. She looks frail and ill, but she looks kind of at peace with the fact that she doesn't really have long left in her life. And It makes me very sad because she could have easily had, you know, another 20, 30 years. One of Jackie's best friends, Bunny Mellon, she lived to be 104 years old. So Jackie could have enjoyed many more years of this beautiful life that she'd managed to create for herself. But she sadly died in her early 60s. But she faced this illness with grace, the same grace that she'd shown throughout her life. She wasn't angry, she didn't shout, she just accepted it, and she made plans to ensure that her children and everything else would be taken care of. So she passed away in 1994. Her children were by her side. She had managed to create this relationship with them that was incredibly loving. She was an incredible mother, and she was able to say that she'd done her duty of bringing up two children who were grounded, balanced, and could live a life because of how she had brought them up. So yeah, Jackie died in 1994, and her influence continues to this day. Like I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, Jackie was very famous in a time where I wasn't born. I was born 30 years later. But her legacy continues, not only in fashion, but in the idea that life can be both public and private. You can be this very public figure, but you can live in a way that really people don't know that much about you. And if you think about Jackie and her life, she was incredibly famous, but what do we know really about the woman that she was? How many times did she conduct an interview where you hear her voice? Hardly ever. We don't know anything really about the woman who she was. And so that is a real legacy. Elegance doesn't require extravagance. Strength can be quiet, composed, and beautiful. And beauty can be found in restraint, thoughtfulness, and culture. So Jackie left behind a legacy of calm dignity that I think feels very rare today. We live in a world where a lot of people are shouting. They're shouting with their wealth, extravagance. We see the billionaires of today really showing their wealth, and not really, you know, wealth isn't whispering anymore, it is shouting. But I think Jackie was somebody who could teach us that true style begins in the soul, with who you are as a person. And you can be very, very wealthy, but if you don't have this beauty inside, then it is a little bit meaningless. So a very rare character, a kind of character that you don't really see these days. I think I talked about Kate Middleton, the now Princess of Wales. For me, she's one of those people, these Jackie types, who is, I think she's one of the only ones that we have in the world today. She is this incredibly famous person, yet we don't know that much about her life. We don't hear her speak that often. She's graceful, she's beautiful, she's quiet, she's dignified, she's an excellent family member, she's an excellent mother, and she leads with this whispering elegance. So I think that is something to be admired. And I think that is why a lot of you like to watch ASMR, because we like quiet, thoughtful beauty. So I really hope that you have enjoyed this look into the life of Jackie Kennedy Onassis, an incredible figure who I find fascinating. Do let me know if you enjoyed this episode and if you would like me to do other videos about fascinating figures. I've really enjoyed sharing my knowledge and my thoughts about this incredible woman, and I hope you have too. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you next time here on Elegant ASMR with me, Nicholas Fairford. Alright everybody, take care.